Well, good evening. If I ask you what humor is, then I think people will not be able to differentiate between humor and vulgarity, because nowadays, as we are living in this technological-driven world, where we have got so many different digital platforms where people are
Mm,
coming and they are sharing their views. They are sharing whatever they think they can share, but
mm,
sometimes they cross over the limits, and
mm,
they lose. I mean, they're unable to decide, what is vulgar and what is humor.
mm,
And this is something we are going to talk about. If we talk about humor, then it's been inseparable part of human communication, right? It also helps us reduce stress, and this
mm,
makes us feel, better. But at the same
mm,
time, we should also be keeping one thing in our mind, whether
mm,
are adding values to people's lives, because
mm,
somewhere if you are doing something which is not at all adding values to people's life, I think
mm,
this is not at all acceptable, and that's what
mm.
we will be talking about, right? So before we go deeper into it, I want Robin, you to start differentiating the terms like what humor is and what vulgarity is, then we'll be going deeper into it.
Okay, good evening, first of all, and good evening to everyone. I was trying to know what could be the definition or what could be that threshold that can help us to understand that what can be perceived as humor and what can be perceived as a vulgarity. So I try to find out a lot. I mean, what could be the best way to understand this, especially for a non-comic person like us. Then I got to know few things, and especially about all those famous and popular comic faces such as Charlie Chaplin and Jimmy and Robin Williams. So these were the famous popular faces in the field of you know comedy, right? So when I heard and read about a bit about these comedians, I got to know a few things, especially their statements. So I think their statements can be used as a thin line that they create for new people who are trying to build their career, especially in the field of comedy. That they should be well aware of this, and that they could pursue their career, but not crossing certain limits that these big comedians have set up for everyone. So what Charlie Chaplin says, especially in this regard, he simply says that a great comedian is one who has a knack of playing with his own emotions and pain. He says that if you can play with your pain, you can play with your own sufferings, and you can present it in a more humorous way, then you are truly a great comedian.
Hmm, yeah.
And similar statements is made by Robin Williams. He also says one thing, that um, true comedy is all about optimism. It gives a positive touch.
Yeah.
So these people, always take this comedy as something which unifies people, and they criticize it vehemently of that nature of comedy which is discomforting in nature, which
Yeah.
degrades people in some or other way. In fact, I'm reminded of one of the famous statement being made by, you know, uh, Jimmy Gaffigan's. He was also a great comedian. He simply says one thing, that, uh, a comedy uh, is something which lets people to have amusement through
Yeah.
the intelligence, witticism of a comedian, right? It should not lead any person to face any discomfort. People join this amusement as a source of recreation, for that they want to overcome their sufferings. They want to get rid of their monotony, right?
Yeah.
And therefore they come and watch these kinds of comedy and comedian shows, comic, right? But when comedians come out and start degrading people, in such a way that they find there is no as such humor in the presentation, but only vulgarity, and that too very explicit. So it is not, taken as a form of amusement of any kind. So it ends up, spoiling the mood of a person. It ends up, breaking the social norms of a particular society for which the society is known for. So these are the few things, I think can be very important and be perceived as a baseline on which this very thin line can be decided that this is vulgarity, that too very explicit, and this is humor. So if we follow this and try to understand, humor in that way, I think, people can really understand, and these comedians could really understand about what is humor and what is vulgarity. One more thing I want to add to this, that one of those, famous, you know, uh, uh, comedian, I forgot the name of this man. He says that some people, uh, just to make their name, especially in a short span of time,
Yeah,
they deliberately make such attempts. And how do they do that? They know pretty well that, yes, this is that line which doesn't need to be crossed. And they deliberately cross it in order to present them as as someone who is regulated by whims and fancies. And that's how these comedians get, overnight, you know uh, fame, as what happens in most of the cases, right? But the comedian also says one thing, that those who, uh, take these, uh, practice as a part of their comedian or as a comic career, then it shows one thing, that they are just uh, trying to hide their lacking of using intelligence, because humor is all about presentation of your intelligence and witticism, which should be very timely. And if someone, takes a shortcut and start abusing and starts using this vulgar language, then it is just nothing but a shortcut to be famous, which is not at all, seen as a part of the comedy at all by all those, popular faces of in the field of comedy. So these are the few things, understanding this, we can certainly ensure that yes, this is humor and this is vulgarity. But at the end of the day, I mean, you or me or anyone can else, can identify this just by judging one simple thing: how do they feel, especially after going through a certain episode of comic styles as a representation being done by any comedian. And if the answer is an affirmation, which means if they really find it amusement or amusing, then it's all okay. But at the same time, if they don't find as such, and moreover it spoils the entire mood, then one can define it as, you know a nonsensical thing, which is termed and coined as, vulgarity.
yeah,
Last point which I want to make to this, which I think is a very strong point according to me, that really defines this thin line. If any person can, use this, dark humor. See, dark humor these days has become quite a popular, content, especially for comedians. And I think it is used uh, by many comedians, for a rightful purpose, because there are certain, social, uh, evils which have to be eliminated. And for that, sometimes a comedian has to take this risk in their hand. They have to be little bit, playful with certain, words, and they start using this dark humor. But their main purpose is to highlight those social evils and eradicate. It means their entire focus, you know gets shifted on the priority as to how one social evil can be eradicated, and therefore they use certain content, but their purpose is and intention is quite pure, and which is praiseworthy, right? But one thing which is contrasting in this matter: if a comedian doesn't find himself to be strong enough to take a standby, of what he has said in the form of, or in the form as a dark content, then it cannot be, termed as, a comic presentation or representation. It is certainly a vulgarity. So how, these comedians make it so simple for even people like us to understand that yes, this is vulgarity and this is, humor. And see, if you say something in the name of comedy, but at the end of the day, if you cannot defend it, then it's purely it's purely a negligible act from the one who has made this or cracked this joke, or who has certainly done something mistake, which is professions, right? So these are the things which are always, uh, in our considerations. And I think using this, we can certainly define what is that thin line and what should be the line that should be drawn for that, this humor and vulgarity can be, distinguished in advance, so that, these events or cases that recently happened in the case of, India Got Latent show, where Alava Diaz was got, has got some, you know, severe criticism, right, over his statement. So such thing could be stopped, right? So that's what I have to say on this. Over to you.
Ever since the situational comedy, also known as sitcom, and stand-up comedy, they came into existence, I think we can see the consistent, or you can say continuous rise in the vulgarity, right? Because what they sometimes when you have nothing to share with people, you think that this is the only option you are left with, and you start using this as well, thinking that you are going to entertain people. But somewhere you may entertain some people, you can say handful of people, but there are people who feel that their feelings are being hurt, right? And this is not at all acceptable, because we are living in a civilized society,
Right.
and people want the role models to be of the kind that that other people can model themselves upon, right?
Right.
So the next question which we are going to discuss is just wait, we are going to have a discussion on different, questions which are going to reveal all those things which people really need to know, and then they'll be getting to know what no where they're crossing over the limit, where people are crossing over the limit.
Right.
So before I ask you a few questions, my first question is gonna be that tell me, where do we draw the line between freedom of expression and the need to maintain social decorum? As we all know that we've been given this particular right of the freedom of expression. This right has been given by our constitution, and we think that we are free to express anything. When we talk about freedom, so freedom has got something which we should ponder upon. Why? Because freedom is freedom when you don't cross over the limits. I mean, if you are free, you cannot do anything. You cannot do everything. There are
Right.
certain things which you should be very conscious of, right? You cannot do those
Hmm.
things even though you are free, because this is what makes us a sensible being, right? So now you're gonna elaborate upon this particular thing, that where do we need to draw the line between freedom of expression and the need to maintain social decorum.
Okay, so there are few things which I want to highlight, right? So that, we could really, make points which are important. See, I mean, every country has its own particular situation and the cultural identity, undoubtedly.
Yeah,
So too, India has the same thing. Since India is known for its cultural values, and it is considered to be a land which is highly, devotional, and religion and dharma are always given a prime place,
yeah,
especially in the country. So one thing is very simple here is that, regardless of anything you do, or maybe you have any sort of your fundamental rights, but there are certain sensitive things which one has to be very careful about. And before they say and do anything, they should be well, aware of their actions that might, break those, laws, break those boundaries, right? Which could really humiliate the entire, social status or the cultural status of the country in the eyes of other. So this is particularly that line which I want to, draw here, is that every person in India has their specific fundamental rights
Yeah.
as enshrined in the Indian constitution, undoubtedly. And it is all well protected. Using Article 32, one can go to the Supreme Court and can also, you know, take a remedy if someone, violates, his or her fundamental rights. But there is also one beautiful thing mentioned in the same constitution, that fundamental rights are not absolute rights. Now, when anyone says that this is not an absolute right, then what it infers? It infers one thing is that you can do anything, whatever you want to do, but make sure that your actions should not be breaking those norms
Yeah.
which shapes human identity or the social values, and that you should be very careful about. In other words, we can say your action cannot be seen as uh, as as antagonism or as negative to the status of your national interest,
Yeah.
because national interest is always given a prime position or a sublime position, if I can say, and this cannot be compromised at all cost. So it is not just with India, it is with almost every countries. You go to Europe, you go to America, you go to Russia, people are given their fundamental rights and they use it, but they are not allowed to you know abuse their fundamental rights
Yeah.
in the name of freedom of expressions. And if they do that, and if any repercussion is perceived on the national identity or the national interest, then it is that person who has done that is subject to a punishment, right? So the same thing is applied here, especially in this regard. Any comedian who says anything and expresses his way of comic style, having a notion that this particular way might really, bring a laughter on people's face. And he does this, without being aware of the fact that certain content may really hit hard to the national, integrity, or it can cause disturbance or create a pandemonium kind of situations. We all know that words have that power, that it
Yeah.
can cause these things very easily. And if this thing happens, then I think this man is one who has to be held accused for that, and he is responsible for that act, right? So whatever happens, especially on this front, and when a person does this out of this very notion of having freedom of expressions, and if he does that, I think no one will accept it, and I think even the country won't even accept it at all, because what comes first in the eyes of every citizen in the country is that the stability of the national integrity. And if this national integrity or the unity is harmed or is injured in any way through just some vituperative words, then this is going to be very uh, uncompromising situation, not just for the citizens, but for the government or the ruler of that particular country, right? So this is one point which I want to, highlight, that um, people can do whatever they want to do, but they should not go against a certain norms, certain values for which, a country is known for, right? Secondly, as we have talked about already, the country is known for its highly devotional, values, as many people staunchly follow it blindly. People have their strong faith, especially in their own, gods, respective gods. In the name of, comedy, if some comedians come out and take a piss at this very habit of these citizens, I think these comedians is are the one who have to, face the brunt of their actions. as a counter from the people. You remember few months or a year back, there were few comedians. I mean, Munabbar Farooqi was one of those comedians. He came to the stage, and he abused his very comic style by harming, injuring the emotions of devotional people, by bringing Hindus god and goddesses, especially in their comic content, which was not acceptable then. And thereafter we can see that what happened, especially with this man. He was put behind the bars. Moreover, his programs of providential programs which were to be conducted at some part of the country were all banned, and he was almost rejected by all institutions where he was being accepted earlier, just by his this one particular act. So one thing according to me is very simple here: whosoever wants to do anything such as cracking jokes, or wants to bring laughter on someone's faces, or maybe wants to create a certain amusing environment or ambience, then he or she must be very careful about his selection of words. And he should be careful only few things which are highly sensitive, as I told you: religion, caste, race, and personal disability. Personal disability is basically found to be the major content, especially for many comedians, which they use it, and as well as they disregard people, making them feel uh, literally low, which is not at all a part of the comedian, right? So these things, if very well taken care of by a comedian, and if he does that, I think this comedy or this particular profession can be you know taken to the next level. And I think in this way the line can be drawn in here, which will be sufficient for a comedy or any comedian or future comedian to come and build their career following all these guidelines. Over to you.
As you've just mentioned that the person you were talking about, when he said something about God and goddesses and religion, then people got very furious, and they, I mean, he had to face the consequences, the repercussions, right? In the similar fashion, in our country, if we talk about parents, right, they are the embodiment of the God, right? And
Mm,
someone comes and says something which is not at all acceptable, especially about parents. I think this shows that we have lost those moral values which we are supposed to have, right? We people, we are living in civilized. We are civilized, and we are living in society. How we are different from animals? Because we are living in society, right? This is not at all the case with the animals, and we've got this intelligence, and which can tell us where this can help us to know right from wrong. And if we ourselves, if we have this ability and we are doing such things, I think how can we then see
mm,
a better
mm,
society? How can
mm,
we see better human beings? Because somewhere we are teaching these people. For example, if we are talking about this vulgarity and humor,
mm.
so we are in some way teaching people, right? So through our videos we are teaching. If we are serving them through a content which is not at all acceptable, I think few people can distinguish. But what about the people? If they start following us,
Right.
they start following the things which we have talked about, and these things are not at all acceptable. I think we are somewhere doing the damage to the society. We are
Right.
doing disservice to this humanity. So this is what we are we should be very careful about, right? So the
Mm,
next thing we will be talking about is, as we have got restrictions. For example, if I am gonna upload a video, so I will be following certain steps in which no we I will also be I will also have this restriction. I mean, whether I want my video to reach the kids, or I want my video to I want my video to reach the adults, or I may have no restrictions. No, see, how do we decide whether this video should reach a specific audience? Because we know the kind of content we are creating, right? What if, even though I apply those restrictions, but somewhere and somehow the people may be exposed to it, right? For
Right.
example, if I'm watching something and I inform others about the content, and they are not falling in this age group,
Right.
but
Right.
they can get to know about it and they can watch it
Right.
through me, right? So somewhere,
Mm.
people are getting to know about all these things. So if we have no such policies, or we have no
Mm.
other no restrictions on this, I think this will remain unrestricted, right?
Right.
So the question we have to discuss is, tell me, is there a social responsibility attached to humor, or
Mm.
should humor or comedy remain uncensored? Because what we saw and what people are watching these days is somewhere, uncensored. So what do you think about it?
When I was reading Gita, I was uh, reading something which really stuck to my mind and still there. And that is that actions, according to Lord Krishna, actions are done through three different ways. One, through your physical movements, through your physical, actions. Second, through your verbal. Okay, what you speak is also part of action.
Yeah,
And third, through your process of thinking, means what you think
that is mental
is
karma.
also part of action.
That is mental
So
karma.
yes, so mental karma. So all these three, you know, forms of actions are making you liable for
Yeah,
something if you do wrong to people, and also make you praiseworthy for something you have done good to the people as a humanity at large, right? So you are going to be affected by either of the things. So this particular thing is very well applicable to all comedians too, because comedians are those who are seen as possessed with intelligence, right? And they have uh, their style of playing with words, which usually people don't have.
yeah,
So they have to be very cautious about their single words that they pick in order to create this amusing environment and ambience to bring a smile and laughter on the face of people. So according to this, I think yes, it is simply attached, to comedy, and this is a very, you can say, as a kind of responsibility for every comedian, and if they, don't, fulfill this responsibility, or anyhow fail to, meet with this responsibility, then I think these are the people should be, you know, put behind, behind a certain kind of system which could ask them a questions, right? As usually what happens. So according to me, I believe that every comedian is someone who needs to be very well aware about the ongoing situation, and he should be very well uh, you know vigilant about all these minuscule events that happened around him. And after acknowledging all these things, if he can create his content believing that this content is not going to be hurtful in any way, then I think such comedians are always appreciated at all
yeah,
fronts. I remember the style of Raju Srivastav, and he is known for his intelligence, and especially his timely cracking joke, because he the one who is known as a great observationalist. Why? Because he picked up all those comic contents right from his routine life, so he never found any other source for creating a certain kind of comic content. So he himself uh, get surrounded with different kind of activities, and he tried to pick all those events, subtle events, and on the basis of it he created his content, and see how famous he was and his style of comedy, right? So these things, I believe, if people and the comedians follow, and even encourage other comedians to follow, This, I think, this entire system of this entire profession could be more uplifted, according to me. So that's what I have to say on this. Over to you.
And I really I'm on the same page with you when you said that they have got social responsibility. I mean, this humor has got social no, social responsibility as well. For example, nowadays we see that the language of the kids and that has changed.
Right.
A lot. You can see that the way they speak, the way they talk to people, the way they behave, everything has just changed. Where is it where this change is coming from? Because they are constantly in touch with the such kind of shows and such kind of reality shows. You can see the same kind of language is being used in web series as well. So there is, I don't see any censorship, especially in these shows. So somewhere they should be realizing that they have got social responsibility. If they don't discharge this responsibility, I think the generation which we are actually the future of the country depends on the coming generation. If this coming generation is not at all responsible, if they have nothing good to offer to the people because they themselves have nothing, so what kind of future we can expect from this generation? So if they are not discharging their duties, if they're not limiting themselves, if they are not realizing this particular thing, then I think we will not be doing a justice to this
Hmm.
forthcoming generation or the generation which is already there, right? So the next thing which we have to
One
discuss
more thing,
is,
one more thing I want to add to this. Uh, every comedian, if you say that they have their followers in millions,
yeah,
so they follow them, right? So, as what happens in the cases of actors, and any sports person, so they closely follow their inspirational figures.
yeah,
And same thing happens, especially in this case. So, as what you have asked as a question, do these uh, comedians need to follow a certain kind of responsibility towards the nation, especially while conducting themselves as a comedian? Then, of course, they need to do that because they have their millions of followers following
yeah,
them. And secondly, they are there to amuse them. Moreover, they're providing a certain kind of services as other professions do, and their service is to make people laugh. And this is the first service they have to do that.
yeah,
In no way they can make people feel bad. They can make people feel savagely sullen for a reason that they have a certain kind of disabilities, and therefore they are the subject of facing such brutal comments in the name of comedy. So these things are not acceptable in the society, and these things, I think, we don't expect from these comedians to follow and you know practice it as a part as a part of their career. So this has to be very well you know uh, uh, understood to all these kind of comedians. Yes, over to you.
I was completely blown away when one day I came across a student of mine, and I got to know how deeply affected he was. Especially, you must be knowing that BTS, right? So, whatever the role models are doing, whatever the way they are behaving, the way they are carrying themselves, the kind of things they are doing, the kind of dresses they are wearing, everything just affects them. Everything affects them, and they can even they can go to any extreme. For example, what I got to know that people, if they are speaking a different language, the people who are following them will start learning those languages because they somehow they just want to be like them. So
Right.
if these because these people are also known as public figures, these people are also role models, and if they themselves are behaving like this, then the people who are following in the footprints will also be modeling themselves upon them, and this is then what the future of this nation will be, right?
Right.
So we have to be very much concerned about it, and people must start, even the government should be taking it very seriously. If the government doesn't, if this cannot serve as a wake-up call to the government, I think then we cannot
Mm.
see a better society, because the day will never come then, right? The next thing which we have to discuss is, tell me, what are the long-term effects of normalizing vulgarity in popular culture?
Okay, so this is one which is highly discussed, especially, and since we are talking about comic style, we are dealing with comedians, so it's really important to deal with this aspect too, because these days, in the name of explicit, vulgarity is what is basically served to the people. And when we say people, it means people from all ages, which means there is no specific limitations as fixed on this. Since those who are willing to use and have the access of internet, they can certainly access this kind of content very easily. So when we see this and take it as a practical part, then we really get, you know, we really find it as too much of concerning. Um, because if you are trying to deal with vulgarity and pondering over making it, normalizing, it means that we are trying to make it a part of discussion continuously in a routine basis among family members. And when we discuss this, taking the entire social status, which is, bedrocked upon strong cultural values, we really find it so, abominable. Why? Because on the one hand, we have certain strong cultural values where family members and our respects to our elders and our respects and to the teachers and maintaining and balancing dignity among certain relationship are always the priority for all of us. And in between, if we bring this kind of content, especially the vulgar one, then I think it is going to be a disastrous for the entire social system, as it can shake the entire social system, right? Because then what we can see that even the youngster may not find it hard to use a certain term of language, you know uh, before their own or his or her own parents or some
Yeah,
seniors. And in this way we can see certainly the overall situation of the society. I can say that there'll be a second kind of anarchism where we will have the administrative forces working on it for the regulation purpose, but there will be no self values, there'll be no self dignity, and there'll be no righteousness for which this country is known for, right?
yeah,
So this vulgarity can never be a part of the social discourse, and it can never be accepted. However, if the presentation of this vulgarity is done for a strong reason, as to there should be at least a strong intent behind it, and that is for only one reason, and that must be consistent with the statement being made by the Charlie Chaplin, that it should be for the unifying purpose, or it should be for integrating purpose, or it should be highlighting a certain social evil, or
yeah,
it should be for a reason that where someone is facing of certain negativity, then using this dark humor, how we can you know uh, you know make this entire negativity as absurdity in order
yeah,
to create a certain trivial impression on those you know uh, uh, on those kind of sincere problems, as usually happens with many of the people. So if these things happen in that way, in the name of vulgarity, and that's how the vulgarity is served, I think um, and I won't use the word vulgarity, I would use rather a dark content, because vulgarity itself a different terminology or it's a different term which is like not acceptable. So what I'm saying is that dark content, even not too much explicit, but at the same time it is done and carried out with a strong intention to reveal a certain thing which is important for the society, then I think it should be accepted. But as I told you, I mean, if this is just for the purpose of normalizing it and accepting it as a part of the habit, then I think it is going to be very difficult. Difficult in a sense that yes, tomorrow we will have these youngsters who are watching and growing up watching these kinds of videos will definitely have impact and influence on them. I
Yeah,
really believe that their productivity might also be affected very badly because language affects a lot. People can't say that language and words don't make much, you know, matter. That's according to many people. It is just a part of joke and not less than, not more than that. But I believe that, when you speak a certain language, language is spoken through words, it is sound. And when it is done with a certain vibration, and when you have a wrong intention, then it creates a kind of uh, animosity among people from the same group, right? And I think one of those one among many uh, uh, comedians, I think I really forgot the name of this comedian. He said one thing, that those who take this vulgarity as a part of their you know uh, cracking jokes, then mostly it is seen that it comes out from the malice nature of that person,
yeah,
right? So this is highly you know objectionable, and this is highly dangerous to a society. However, it cannot be seen today as a as a dangerous aspect. But truly, if this particular situation comes and remains and sustains for over the period of time, and our youngsters, I mean, grow up watching these kind of content, then I think what will be facing the biggest damage is nothing but the relationship itself.
yeah,
So it would be the relationship that will be at stake, and as we all know, that relationship is said to be uh, the first unit, if you can say, of the entire social system. Because when relations are formed, family is formed, and when family is formed, society is formed,
yeah,
and then it converts into city, state, and nation, and the world, right?
yeah,
So relationship really play a very vital role in forming a strong social system. And when these relationship you know uh, face this kind of you know uh, assault in the name of comedy through just words, I think it is going to be detrimentally affected. And I think the consequences of it would be irreparable, which means there will be no as such remedy be left for it for the future to repair it. Because once the relationship is broken, I think it is broken forever. And what to say about the respect and the self dignity, that will be the second thing for the discussion in this matter. So these things, I think, very important. And therefore I say that yes, it is a moral obligation for any comedian whoever wants to build his career, especially in this field, must be uh, very sensible about in following this uh, duty, a responsible duty, and must be against all those things which leads them to trivialize this kind of dark content, especially the explicit vulgarity. So that will be, I think, a total responsibility to be abided by a person. What do you?
I listen to many people. I mean, people who are comedians, people who are poets, and I've seen that they're able to make you laugh, no matter what age group you belong to. They
Right,
can make you laugh. You must be knowing
right,
so Sunil Doshi, right?
right, right.
If you know him, right?
Yes,
So
surely.
you can say a few names. I cannot recall them right now, but I think you must be knowing Sunil Doshi. Do you know him? So,
I heard about him. Yeah.
right. So if you listen to him, it really he'll crack you up with his jokes, and they are full of decency. There is nothing indecent in the jokes he cracks. So it is possible, if you want to make people laugh, if you want to make people have a spellbound with your witticism, you can do this. If you have this art, if you have the knack of doing this,
Hmm.
if you have the knack of
Right.
coming up with some something which is really very
Hmm.
effective, you can do
Hmm.
that. But if you are somewhere lacking in the knack of
Hmm.
being
Right.
very witty, then I
Hmm.
think you will be taking the help of, you'll be resorting to something which is going to be quite vulgar, right? So the next thing which we are gonna discuss. So I think it's not gonna be that difficult for you if you really want to make a career in in this comedy field. I think it is possible, but yes, you'll have to work really very hard. Just by resorting to cracking some vulgar jokes is not gonna help you be a good comedian.
Right.
The next thing which we are gonna discuss is, tell me, should offensive humor be regulated by law, or that infringe on personal liberty?
Oh, it's very obvious. So I think there is no as such, opposition for a kind of need which demands a certain regulations to be there in the society for the purpose of balancing this very you know comic representations, and balancing with what, balancing with social norms and social values. And for this matter, I think we should have a certain kind of rule. In fact, we have a law that really checks every content. And if the content crosses a certain limit, goes against the boundaries and the rules which is defined by the law, then obviously the content is censored or censorized, right? So this happens with almost every content. But one thing we also must know, that until unless a particular show is is especially taken under this law, the show is almost free from all you know obligations, right? As what happened in the case of this show, the controversial one, and that is India Got Latent. And since the show was only for a particular segment of people, and that too only 18 plus were as eligible candidate who could subscribe that particular show, and it was not open and accessible to all, right? Since it was only for a certain number of people, moreover the show was not you know sponsored by any of the company, so it was a volunteer act, you can say, a voluntarily a volunteer show, right? Which was privately owned. So there was no as such sponsorship on it. There was no such big companies and its tax associated with it. So when we have certain shows, especially on YouTube, and that too are almost free from all those obligations of this rule book, then I think it is futile to say that whether these content should be regulated or not, right? So I mean, this thing we must also accept it, because YouTube is very uh, vast, and I think people from all ages go and have the access to it without having any charge that they have to pay for this, right? So this is the one part of the discussions, right? And the second question, what was the second question of
I mean, the
yes,
second question
in,
was
yes, in personal identity infringed, something like, what
infringe
was that?
upon personal, yes.
Okay, it's very common. And what's that common in this? That when a comedian comes out with this comic representation, and which is highly vulgar, then first of all, and especially when it is directly pointed against someone, as what happens recently in the case of India Got Latent. So their contestants were there, and judges would hurl them questions which
Yeah.
were very you know despicable, which were very loathing in nature. but they have to respond to that. Now it is us who have to decide it, whether it really infringes our personal identity, or it doesn't. Because as long as we are comfortable with it, I think there is no as such uh, punishment a person can face, because it is all free from certification board, right? So there is not at all requirement for that show to collect any certification from any board, so that they could really proceed up with its serving to all section of people. So it purely depends upon us who are dealing with this kind of content. So if we don't find it's encroaching in our personal liberty, or it is hurting in some other way, then I think these contents will always be acceptable to all section of people, and people won't even object that. That's what happened in this case too. So these contestants were quite comfortable, you know having certain questions which were very uh, vulgar, explicitly vulgar, I'll say. And since they were very comfortable with it, but people who watched that, people who got an access to these kinds of clips through Instagrams, through Facebooks, these people really found it so offensive, and thereafter they started uh, creating uh, turmoil kind of situations across the country, especially with the demand that these people should be arrested and the show must be shut down. And that's what happened as a result of, as a consequences of it, right? So it certainly deals with it, and certainly impacts a lot, undoubtedly. But as I told you, it totally depends on us, how do we deal with it. With you.
As far as I know, the humor is all about bringing the evil of the society, and whatever the bad is happening in country. It is all about bringing that in front of the people, right? So that the concerned authorities may get to know the gravity of the matter, right? So this is all about, because this humor can be satire, this humor can be in the form of irony, this humor can also be in the form of direct criticism. But if you are using vulgarity in the form of humor, I think this is somewhere going to have people this can offend people, right? The thing which we are going to discuss is, tell me, can humor still be impactful without
Hmm.
relying upon vulgarity or offensive content?
I'll say yes, because this dark content, as we experience and perceive, which includes vulgarity, sexual content, and several such things, I think is the current scenario that we face today. Earlier, there was nothing as such, and rarely comedians would bring this kind of dark content. And if they did it very rightfully, very timely, and there was always a lesson at the end of their conclusions of whatever they spoke in the name of comedy or a comic content, right? So they did it so beautifully, so timely. But since we are talking about dark content, and that too in the context of 21st century, then here we have to be very you know uh, careful, because as we have seen, uh, that mostly comedians, just for the sake of earning overnight fame, they often cross those boundaries, and they really violate those these kinds of rules and instructions, which should not be. And in that way, they really you know make the entire sacred profession very vulnerable very vulnerable, and it keeps facing criticism, as what happens, right, most of the time. So these things, I think, are very important for a comedian to know. And the second thing, which I believe, that mostly comedians, in fact, there was a comedian, Jerry Seinfeld. He says that a great comedian is one who picks up those subtle events from their life and present it in a way that it brings laughter on face of people. It means comedian is one who is an observationalist, so he can observe things what happens around him, and he can really, using his witticism and intelligence, create that particular content and uh, use it, especially uh, uh, for the purpose of amusing, right? So that's how, mostly comedians, took this profession and dealt with this, content of comedy. So as they have said it, so I think it's easily acceptable for people like us. And lastly, one of those comedians says one more thing, that those who don't have this intelligence and wit, especially to entertain people by picking up those subtle events, they often take resort to this vulgarity and use it as a part of the content, right? But at the same time, if these comedians are not in the position to take a position, you know, especially in favor or in the defense of what they have said, they really fall flat on this. At what happens, most of the times. And in fact, we have seen videos of Ranveer Alavadia.
Hmm.
He is extending his apology. So he is extending his apology for what? For
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 his
something he has
popularity,
uttered.
because that'll be going down. His popularity will go down.
Okay, no, but one thing is very important. Something, as as someone who is a comedian has said something, or let's say any person who had
He's
said
not at all
something.
a comedian.
He's not at all a comedian. So let's say he's not a comedian, but if he had said something, then he should be held responsible for that first.
Hmm.
Second, if he has said something even in the name of comic representations, as he thinks to be or
Hmm.
supposed to be,
Hmm.
then he should be able to defend his position. If any person, regardless of the content he has used or he has thrown right to the audience, if he has the ability to defend his content, then in this way even those deepest dark humor could also be acceptable. But the thing and the requirement is that one needs to defend it. Now this man came out in public and started extending his apology, which means that he has realized his you know fault, that he was at fault. He has realized his blunder that he had just committed, because he was not supposed to say and use certain comment which was not at all for the purpose of comic representations. In fact, there is a clear cut line between two things: intelligence, dark humor, and second is pointless shock value jokes,
Yeah.
right? So intelligence, dark humor is all acceptable. You can use all forms of content, okay, excepting few which don't seem to be as a part of comedy or the content of comedy. And second is pointless shock value jokes. These jokes are often you know uh, cracked and found that they are absolutely pointless, as what happened in the case of Ranveer Alavadia. The question he threw or hurled at the contestant was not at all, a comic element, as it didn't serve this very feature, and it was not, amusing people at all. So it was a complete pointless on this very part. So if these things are clear already, I think before one sets up, especially on the stage, and just go and get a direct connect with the audience and start his comic representation, then I think things could be even more smoother, according to. Over to you.
What I believe is that why is he coming out and apologizing to the people? Because he knows that if he doesn't apologize to people, he'll be losing his audience. He will be losing the opportunities of doing podcasts with popular, people who are, you can say, generally he has these kind of, podcasts with the people who are, expert in the fields, right? Suppose if he was not apologizing, rather if he would have been accepted by people, right? If this had been welcomed by people, I think he would never apologize.
Right.
He is apologizing because he is somewhere he has realized that the people have started unfollowing him, and
Right.
this is going to cost him very dear, and he doesn't want to lose his business, right? He doesn't
Right.
want to lose his popularity. That's why he's coming out and apologizing to people.
Right.
I'm damn sure if it wasn't, if it was welcomed by people or accepted by people, he would never have come out and
Right.
apologize, because this is the kind of fear which people have struck in his heart, right?
Right.
The last and but not the least, the question which we're going to discuss is, tell me, what responsibilities do digital platforms have in curbing the spread of vulgar humor? Because somewhere it was uploaded on a platform, and if this was not allowed, I think they wouldn't have uploaded such kind of content. And this was not the only one. Such kind of contents have been uploaded, and they are
Mm,
being they are being streamed on these
mm.
platforms. But if they don't have any responsibility, such kind of contents will be streamed and will be uploaded in the days to come as well. There will be there will be no you can say no restriction on these kind of contents. So tell me, what are the responsibility of digital platforms? How can they curb such kind of contents from being uploaded?
S- See, all these, channels and social networking sites or digital platforms are purely a source of commercial increment,
Yeah,
undoubtedly.
yeah,
So I don't think that these platforms would even think of or would even deem to think of whether they should, understand and realize their responsibilities towards any country. Let's say if it may be Facebook or Instagram or whatsoever, they will never realize their responsibilities because their purpose is only to make money.
yeah,
But what is there which could force them to follow a certain instructions and be little bit balanced in serving its facilities, especially in the name of digital platforms? And on this particular part, I believe it's the government of the country which could really force these channels and the digital platforms to behave sensibly and to act proactively, especially on those matter where these social networking sites and the digital platforms are used to spread a certain kind of vulgarity, especially in the societies, and that vulgarity is seen as a biggest or the biggest threat or the menace to the stability of the society. So I believe that it is only the government which could really impose certain restrictions on it, and it is only possible through subjecting these digital platforms to a certain kind of fine arrangement or the punishments, right? If they are seen as not compliant towards all these restrictions. In fact, one of those laws called IT, Information Technology Act 2000, right? And then there is a specific section of it, section 67A, 67B. I mean, these sections purely deal with the responsibilities of the social networking sites and the digital platforms, which means that if a person uses these digital platforms for the purpose of creating any nuisance or causing any disharmony or creating any sort of pandemonium situations around the city or disturbing the harmony of a society, then these platforms you know will itself take an action against them and will delete a certain kind of post or certain kind of actions or whatever it is if from their digital platforms, and their account might be uh, banned for a certain period of time as a warning given to all these kinds of miscreants people as it happens, right? So it even happens today, but as I told you, until unless the government comes out with a stern disciplinary act, then even these social networking sites or digital platforms can never act sensibly, because at the end of the day, a businessman only takes care about his own profit and the
yeah,
interest,
correct.
and
Absolutely.
he doesn't really concern about the chaos that this business may create, especially in the society, because he is not responsible for it as what he thinks of, right? So that is what is the situations. It is not just a situation in India, across the globe. So I think it's the government, and on the part of the government, it should be seen as a responsibility to it, and it should, regulate these, digital platform with some strict rule, without giving any, leniency, right? So in this way, I think the comedian shows and the vulgarity and the dark content could be, sophisticatedly, balanced. And I think in this way, the balance, sorry, freedom of expressions can be very well balanced. So that's what I have to say on this.
You know, the way we have got all the power, especially in democracy, to overthrow the government if it doesn't take care of our interests. In the similar fashion, we people have got all the rights, and we have got all the power to reject outright such kind of content, right? And I think these people will then not be creating such kind of content. For example, how such kind of content is coming into existence, because somewhere we are accepting it, right? And somewhere we are ready to welcome it. For example, what how changes take place. They do the kind of experiment. Sometimes they do experiments, and just to see if it is going to be a hit among people. And when people accept it, they start serving as the same kind of thing as much as they can, right? Because they somehow they have got the so one they have got one thing on their mind, that they have to make the most of this opportunity. They have to make money, because these people are you can say these people are always behind, or you can say they are after fame, they're after money, they're after wealth. So if this is not welcomed, I think we can then this is how we can draw the line, right?
Right.
Because we have got this intelligence, we can easily identify whether the content being served is a humor or vulgarity,
Mm.
right? So it is our responsibility to raise our voice when it is required, right? So because you might have seen when something wrong happens, especially in the government, people are coming out and they're raising their voices. But what
Right.
happens when why do these people not come out and raise their voices when such kind of things go without any check, right?
Right.
So this is something which we had to talk about, and I hope that people will now be making the most of their right. They're making the most of their independence, because they're independent and they can come out with a lot of you can say determination, and then they cannot let these people spoil the future generation, and then we can save this country, we can save this world from being spoiled, right? So this is with this I'm taking a leave. I'll see you in the next video.
Okay, bye, good night.
Right.